Hello and welcome to our video contemplation of day signature 43. This frequency of 43 corresponds in the Liberated Tarot to the Prince of Wands and the noble role of ignition. It is represented by the Angels of Valor and Epiphany. Babe, would you like to share more about those angels?
Yes. So the 21st Angel of Valor walks the pathway of the guardian to become the embodiment of command. And then the 43rd Angel of Epiphany walks the pathway of insight to become the embodiment of breakthrough.
Every day, I feel like we're saying the same thing, but again, I'm kind of amazed by the largeness of these words. Command and breakthrough, ignition. They're very wands-like too.
Absolutely, yes. There's a lot of energy in this frequency. Not only the angels bringing that energy, but the Prince of Wands. Yeah. The wands have a lot of energy, and then the Prince has that youthful vitality.
Yes, absolutely. I also can't help but think, anytime I see the 43, I'm reminded of 143. I'm sure I've told you this before. Many of you are probably aware of it, but that frequency of 143 is recognized as one of Mr. Rogers' like personal numerology numbers. It was very important to him because he saw the words "I love you" in 143.
Yep.
And so he kind of lived in that, the signature of that frequency, differently from how we might. But ever since learning that early on, I've always seen "I love you" in 143. So I can't help but see love or love you in the frequency of 43 too. I think right out the gate it gives us a sense of what the flavor of this day and this frequency might be bringing in orientation, in essence.
Yeah, definitely. I like that.
Yeah. There's a lot happening here. The first thing I think we should probably cop up to before just going full force into everything that we're excited to share is the fact that today, like many of these days...
I'm not sure how many videos we've done in a row at this point yet, but they're all the same. In this regard?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was going to speak for myself. It sounds like it's true for you too, but I know this morning in particular, again, I woke up and I was thinking about the 43, the Prince of Wands, these angels and the words connected to them, and I was just going... how are we going to connect all these dots? I don't even know if I really understand what the pathway of the guardian is meant to convey. We may just have to kind of keep it general today. You know, there's this initial insecurity about what in the world might show up.
Yes. Well, we meet the frequency of the day totally fresh, like it's a clean slate. We know that the structure is in place, but each day we show up to have this contemplation. It's totally new to us, and we're discovering it like very much in the moment. Alongside you, basically.
The only real difference is that we have a few hours leading up to this moment where we begin to speak. And I think what's blowing our minds right now is the miraculous nature of those few short hours. Because in the amount of time it takes for us to wake up, drink some coffee, go for a short walk around the block, get cleaned up and ready to share this time with you. In that short span of time, day after day, life is saying, you're open for it, here you go. You're willing, ready and willing to receive this, here you go. And it's just this rush of insight, day after day. We literally, from the time we woke to now, we went from being kind of insecure about what we might be able to share in this moment to being so filled to overflowing with insight and excitement and awareness that there literally isn't any way we could possibly get it all across in any length of time. It's just all there all at once. So we share that for a few reasons. One, we really want to make it clear to anyone viewing or listening to this that we are no different from you. This is one example that we are living through right now, but we all meet life in a similar way. There's this initial sense of, I don't know, which if we're open and willing, life then fills with knowing. we want to make that clear. We're not here to provide answers. We're here to engage in this process of discovery and surprise right alongside you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's a good beginning point. I guess the only other addition to that would be buckle up. There's a lot that we're excited to share. If, as has happened for us in some cases, we become all tongue-tied and scrambled in our attempts to articulate what's happening, understand that it's a backlog of so much information that's somehow like attempting to communicate itself in words, which is, its own dance. So bear with us. We're going to do the best we can to show you as much as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now we get to choose where to begin. Do we want to begin? Let's begin by sharing how special this particular day is based on the frequency.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yes.
You want to tell them?
Frequency 43 is a shared frequency between the two of us because it's our legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from our last name, Brainerd.
Correct. So in both the Crystal Self Chronicle, which is a PDF booklet that we prepare for anyone who's interested in such a thing, in both the Crystal Self Chronicle and the Crystal Self Odyssey, which is a 12-week journey that we go on with a small group a couple of times each year.
Virtual journey, that is.
A virtual journey. Mm-hmm. In either of these cases, you will meet your legacy, the frequency connected to your legacy. That frequency will be derived from your last name. And ultimately, the idea of a legacy isn't all that dissimilar from a life's work. It's connected to that idea of life's work. But really what's happening here is something that extends far beyond whatever it is you may do or produce or contribute in your lifetime, to begin to draft this sense of its impact.
Mm-hmm.
There's an atomic result of your existence, and that's true for every one of us. We begin to learn about what's happening there through our legacy, the frequency of our legacy. This frequency of 43 is shared because we both now share the same last name, a name which we have very consciously, publicly, and completely claimed for ourselves. Obviously, I was born into it. Laura has chosen to become a part of it. But together, we realize that what we're doing together is something altogether different from what anyone before me and my family has ever done, or anyone in my family currently is doing. So what's happening here and what we see in this frequency of 43, we consider to be, we claim it as specific to us. It's original, it's new. Mm-hmm. And so it feels really close to home. We're really excited about being here today in this frequency.
Yeah.
And because of the fact that this is a personal frequency for us, today is another personal vortex day. We've been in quite this awesome sweep of personal vortex days. It may seem like that's just the case. Like, well, I guess every day is a personal vortex day. That's not at all the case. It just so happens that in this area, we've got a lot going on. So we're excited about that. Mm-hmm. What else? Where would you like to go from there? Do you want to dive right into the Prince?
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to the Prince because this word legacy is very much connected to the story of the Prince.
You're correct. It's got this kind of generational signature, this cyclical like movement about it.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Very much. I think that the Prince's story is something that is very recognizable. Everybody kind of knows this story because we tell these stories all the time. And I definitely have a personal connection to the Prince because I've lived this story as well. So I'm really excited to talk about it because it's almost easy because it's so familiar, you know? But yes, so this idea of legacy in context of the Prince's story, we know that he's born into this this family that is, he knows he's born into this and it's almost like his birthright, and his life is planned out already before he's even able to walk.
Yeah, he's born into an eventual role. And until the time where he inevitably becomes king, he is in the role of the Prince, and that role has certain expectations.
Right.
Appears to have certain expectations. And those can feel very heavy. They can feel overwhelming. They can even feel unfair, which is kind of interesting to consider the fact that you're born into the inheritance of a kingdom.
Right.
And initially under the weight of expectation, external expectation, it can feel like, man, I don't even think I want this.
Right. I mean, there's so many different feelings that the prince could have about his situation.
Yeah.
But definitely, I think what happens with the prince is that whether he really wants to make, the king proud or his father proud, or whether he is almost rebellious about it, in either case, this prince has to find his self, like his own self, his sense of self, his own way, his own, just his individuality has to kind of blossom. And that can be, again, just, it's under the public eye at the same time. So
it's a bit of a process, and it's as personal as it is, it's also very much on the surface. Mm-hmm. There's a great deal of kind of, I think, intimidation and insecurity around that too, I would expect.
Right.
Obviously, we're playing out the idea of a prince within this context of the nobles and this context of kind of like a medieval conceptualization of the nobles.
Yeah. So it's a metaphor for
correct.
Life in general.
But a useful one.
Absolutely, because these are experiences that we have as regular humans. We don't have to be born into, this sort of lofty role to experience the same sort of thing.
Well, when you extend the metaphor, of course, to each of us, you realize that though you may not be, the prince of some literal place on this planet, each of us has been born into the kingdom of life. Mm-hmm. And each of us is supported by that life in the same way that the prince knows that when he becomes king, he will be supported by, a castle full of servants and legions of, guardians. It's like all of this is somehow built in, the support, the security, all of that comes along with the role. And in our life, in our real life, when we connect it to ourselves as individuals, regardless of who we are, it doesn't matter if you're a literal king or a janitor. Mm-hmm. In every case, you are born into the kingdom of life and you face the exact same opportunity to claim for yourself the magnificence of that role, however it may express. Mm-hmm. So we really enjoy these archetypal figures and contexts, the stories that they produce, and the awareness that they can begin to ignite within us as they do. So the prince is going to become a king, right? But he's not there yet. Mm-hmm. We have certain keynotes that we connected to the prince. Yesterday we talked about the keynotes we connect to the princess. We'll share the keynotes that we've discovered for the prince as well, but in a moment. But first, I just wanted to say that it might be easy for those of you who are familiar with the tarot to attempt to connect certain dots between the traditional tarot and the liberated tarot. I did the same initially. I was looking for really the answer to the question of, hey, where'd the page go? Right. Which of these new figures is more or less equal to whatever it was that the page represented in the traditional tarot. And we were talking a bit about that even just this morning. I think it's fair to say that the page, the whole idea of the page as this kind of youthful, even immature kind of figure, even the placement of the page within the noble family is very peripheral. That whole idea has been released altogether and replaced with not one but two figures, the prince and the princess. Mm-hmm. So the page is replaced with the prince and the princess. And here still, in both the princess and the prince, we find this youthful quality. But in the prince in particular, this youthful quality is not in any way juvenile or immature. It's actually very focused. This youthful essence is expressing itself through vitality, through action, through intent. Mm-hmm. It's very engaged. It's very involved. It's very purposeful. It is really as far as you can get from immature. In fact, if anything, the challenge for the prince is not to become too serious in one direction or another, whether he's very seriously oriented toward becoming everything his father, the king, so to speak, needs him to be, or very serious about the effort of trying to slough it off and saying, forget this, I want no part in any of that noise. In either direction, the true challenge for the prince initially is going to be to relax, to relax into the awareness that he is meant to grow up into something very powerful and very beautiful, that he's meant to become more than himself even. He's meant to become a larger idea.
Right.
That the kingdom then depends upon in order to continue growing and in order to continue evolving.
And that's really humbling.
Oh, it once you recognize it, it's really humbling. And again, we must draw the connection back to ourselves to realize that the moment any of us are born into the kingdom of life, so to speak, we too carry that exact same responsibility. We too are meant to become large. We are meant to express the largeness within us. That's what it means to reclaim our inheritance. It means to stand as tall as we possibly can and to realize that the light we shine out into life has an impact and that the model we set does matter. And it's either going to be an expansive impact or it's going to be a restrictive or fear-based impact. But we are the only ones responsible for determining what the quality of that impact may be. So we all carry this kind of like same sense of responsibility and the same largeness that we find here in the idea of a prince. The Prince of Wands, of course, being wands, is going to be very dynamic, very fiery, tons of energy. There's a lot of energy here. It's energy meant to move. The question is, what direction will it move in?
Right. Yeah. So that's why the noble role for this Prince of Wands is ignition.
Very fiery in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I would love to come back to that and like really like expand it because it feels very personal, I think, for us, especially now. But I did promise to share the keynotes and I forgot to.
Okay.
So let's do that briefly. Let's share the primary keynote for the Prince of Wands. We always work with one initial or primary keynote, which is...
Ignition?
Nope. That's the noble role. The keynote for the prince itself, regardless of its placement.
You said Prince of Wands.
Okay, my bad.
All princes
Correct.
Are elegance.
Yes. The keynote for the prince as an archetype, regardless of whether it's in the wands or the hearts or the swords or the diamonds, is elegance. We enjoy the distinction, kind of considering the distinction between grace and elegance. We met this keynote of grace in the princess. We meet this keynote of elegance in the prince. The difference between them is basically the difference between yin and yang, between feminine and masculine. That silent grace that's kind of automatic and inherent, subconsciously a part of or an essential part of the princess. It's like she's not doing anything to produce that grace. She just naturally exudes it. That's very feminine, you know. The prince has a little more intent, kind of like woven into that same grace. Yes, it's exuding out of him as well because grace is inherent to all of us, but what he's meant to represent is basically what we do with that gift of grace, the kingdom, so to speak. So elegance has more intention and it has more purpose. Elegance is something we cultivate. And that's a part of what we see the prince representing. Other keynotes, we may need to pull them up so that we can remember them since we actually just found some of them this morning. Oh,
yeah, I did write them here.
You did? Okay, perfect.
We can also look there.
Great. So one that we were surprised to find this morning was humility. That was Laura's finding, actually. Do you want to explain what you were seeing in that? Do you remember offhand?
Well, I think because when we sort of have this realization that we're born into life and that sort of the significance of that descends upon us, it is humbling. Yeah,
how grand that is, the magnificence of that, the responsibility that we've mentioned that's kind of inherent to that. All of these things, very, very humbling when you realize that not only are you here, but you're here on purpose. And not only do you get to choose, but that your choices have an impact.
That you are an integral part of the whole story.
Yes, that's humbling. It's beautiful and it's a gift. It's a miracle and it's deeply humbling. And it's meant to ignite that humility so that as you move, you're able to move with the grace of that humility kind of woven into your choices and your movements. Another word was growth. I didn't realize until a bit later in the morning that this image that I was randomly kind of recognizing in my own mind's eye as I was making coffee this morning, I didn't realize the image was connected to this, but of course it is. So the image we've mentioned before in previous conversations, but it's the image of an upward spiral, a spiral that is moving upward and outward simultaneously, almost like a vortex might be if we drew one. That spiral that's moving upward and outward simultaneously is the image of growth. We talked a bit yesterday about the circle that grows and includes everything that was previously within the circle. Well, that circle isn't only expanding this way, it's also expanding in that third dimension. You know, it's moving and deepening, and it's becoming larger and higher simultaneously. That's a part of what we find here in the prince. Right. He realizes that there's a distance from being the prince to being the king. It doesn't happen overnight. There is a pattern of growth that unfolds. Right. I think what's interesting about this is that the prince becomes representative of a signature inherent to life itself, which differs dramatically and necessarily from what we tend to think of in terms of growth. I think generally when we think in terms of growth, we've been trained to think in terms of self-improvement, self-development, taking something which is so big and attempting through some effort to make it larger, as if whatever it was weren't quite as good as it could be. Life is never operating under these assumptions. Life is always beginning with perfection and expanding from there. That's what this prince is representative of. It's representative of a perfection that lives and moves and breathes and has a being in life so that it can expand.
Yeah, and I think that what the prince comes to realize is that he's not here to replicate what the king did and follow in his exact footsteps and be a carbon copy of the king. He's meant to evolve in a way that captures this new era and continues the legacy, but in an expanded way.
Yeah, in a whole new direction, because it's now moving through a whole new medium, the prince instead of the king. Right. That's so important. And consider that what's happening here is not better than what came before. Right. It's different than what came before. And so that spiral, that evolution, I really like the word evolution in this case. It's extremely appropriate.
Frequency match to 43 is the word evolve.
Really? I didn't even notice that. Okay, so there you go. Right on theme for the day. I believe that to be extremely appropriate. We do transcend and expand on whatever came before. This is true of all of us. We are meant to. We are not meant to become carbon copies of anything which came before, no matter how beautiful that thing may have been. Nor could we ever effectively replicate anything that came before, because we are not that thing. We are new. We are fresh personalities, and we're meant to be. This is going to be one of the prince's greatest challenges, is to realize that however much he may wish to meet the expectations that have been set for him, perhaps by the king or the kingdom or whomever, or however much he may wish to rail against them, his life really has nothing whatsoever to do with them. They are a groundwork or a foundation which has been set for him to spring off of. He's meant to catapult up and out into something else, not something better, but something larger by virtue of the fact that it's new. And so where this prince, who then becomes a king, eventually leads this kingdom, will differ in many significant ways from what the kingdom once was. And it's meant to be that way. It's meant to continue growing. And our lives are meant to be that way. And who we are as a Brainerd family, so to speak, will look and must look very different from the family I was raised in as a son of my parents. And that's just how life continues itself. So there's something very humble about that, but also very responsible about that. And there is a need for courage in that. We're going to look at that in a moment.
Definitely.
But we've mentioned humility. We've mentioned growth. We need to mention refinement, because a part of this process, of course, is this growing awareness that who I am is different from perhaps who I thought I was, or who I was told that I was, or who I expected myself to be, or who they expected me to be. There's this process of continual refinement that kind of whittles down to a more and more perfect point the fullest possible expression of oneself. That whittling is literally a whittling away of all the agreements and ideas that do not, in fact, resonate with the underlying truth of your unique self-expression. But the moment you arrive at that point, the moment you've refined your voice, your way enough to express itself as your own, you meet the final keynote, which we've discovered for this figure of the tarot, which is originality.
Mm-hmm.
Your way will be different. It will be different because it must be different. It must be different because you are different.
Yeah.
And it becomes different. This is something we'll return to over and over again, not only in this conversation, but probably every one that we have.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes different because of what you love.
Yes.
Because of what you prefer. Because of those inherent tendencies that you can or cannot explain. It's because of what you uniquely love. Mm-hmm. Even if, and especially if, that's different from what the king loved or what anyone thought you should or shouldn't love.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that is the sort of the clincher there,
mm-hmm.
is understanding that you get to that place by loving what you love.
Yeah.
And just permitting that, permitting what you love to sort of have your energy, give that your energy.
You can imagine in our little story of the prince, you can imagine how this prince is surrounded by educators and politicians and very large, very noisy figures, all of whom are telling him exactly what he is supposed to become, exactly what the role he's meant to fulfill looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine the really titanic effort that will be required in order for this figure to permit what he loves. I mean, imagine that prince who loves art.
Yeah. What if he loves like the library, or he loves nature and he's constantly like running away from, you know, whatever lessons he's supposed to be learning that day, taking little opportunities to kind of escape to the woods or something.
With his journal to like draw frogs or something.
Yeah. Anything like that. I can totally picture that.
Yeah. Well, the promise, of course, I say of course, but it's not always obvious to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
The promise is that whatever those quirky tendencies may be, they will in time serve the kingdom. Absolutely. If it's books, if it's art, whatever it may be, in every case, if permitted, they will serve not only the fulfillment of the prince's life,
mm-hmm.
but the expansion and the evolution of the kingdom.
Yeah.
I started laughing when we mentioned this, just because I went straight to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I don't know if you've even seen that yet.
Yeah.
Okay. But there's the one prince, and he's real wimpy and really like whitewashed and like sickly looking.
Mm-hmm.
And he just likes to sit at the window and sing.
Oh yeah.
and the dad's always coming along to try and get him like interested in girls or something. He's trying to get him married off.
Yeah.
And the one line in my family, we always quote it because it's the funniest thing, but he's always like, "But father, I'd rather just sing," you know? It's just like, that's right. I mean, it's a hilarious representation of what we're describing, and obviously a wimpy one.
Mm-hmm.
But what we find, of course, is that in real life, there's nothing wimpy about permitting your enjoyment. And the angels over and over and over again, from all these different angles and all these different ways, have told us this one thing. They just keep hammering on this one thing. They've literally told us that it is the sole theme that all 64 angels are meant to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
They tell us, love what you love to permit your enjoyment. Your way unfolds when you do.
Mm-hmm.
Consider what it might mean for that to be true. And now consider how much actual vitality, willingness, open-heartedness, courage it's going to take in order to permit that to unfold against all the odds, against all the voices telling you you can't or shouldn't, against all your own insecurities telling you that you absolutely can't and you definitely shouldn't. Something inside of you has to become larger than all of that and just start whittling away. Start whittling away and say, nope, nope, nope. I will not succumb to these voices because there's something inside of me which is alive, and somehow, whether I can explain it or not, it's more important.
Mm-hmm.
It's more important than any of that. That's going to take some special quality of effort.
Yeah.
That quality of effort, of course, is a rescuing of your deeper self. It's a permitting of that truer self within you, so that life can be benefited as a result.
Yeah. It is the 64 angels who are wanting to
Absolutely,
express,
yes.
but they're, your unique combination, and they must express. So it's, sooner or later, you can't kind of escape it.
No, it's a pressure. You feel it as a pressure. That's why we can't get away from it. It's why when I was working as a machinist for 8 years and hating every minute of it, I knew every single minute of that 8 years that I was not where I was meant to be. And it was experienced at the time as a sick feeling, as a deep pressure. And that pressure was enforcing movement. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It wasn't trying to punish me. It was leading me. It was calling me. And there's no getting away from that, especially once you become open to the awareness that you have been born into the kingdom and you do, in fact, serve a very specific role. It just might look differently than anyone has begun to guess or to assume or to imagine. So it's time to go on this great big hero's journey to uncover what that is.
Yeah.
That's why we go on the hero's journey, not to develop some part of ourselves which is lacking, but rather to permit all of ourselves so that we can commit ourselves completely and totally in one direction towards one end.
Yeah.
That's how life begins to flow. I mean, we've spent more time with this prince than we've spent with any archetype yet, but somehow it contains not only the story of this 43rd frequency, but also our story as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Because a part of our legacy is what we're doing right here. As long as there is an internet and a YouTube and websites, these videos will extend beyond us to touch others in ways we have no control over. YouTube, for example, those algorithms are going to go and show these conversations to people that we will never meet. And they will have an impact on people that we will never know about. And that may, in fact, go on beyond, the term length of our physical existence. What's happening here is absolutely contributing to the legacy. But what's happening here in this conversation is only possible because of what's happened here between us and the agreement that we've made between our hearts and the union that has become possible for us here and the sharing of this legacy frequency. All of that roots what then becomes expressed in form or in conversation. So we know, and we don't need to go into any specific detail, but we know what a great challenge it was for us to arrive at this moment. There were many critical voices leading up to this point, leading up to our marriage, leading up to us even meeting in person. It wasn't easy for us.
Right.
But that same underlying awareness, that pressure, that calling, that knowing, all of that was intact. And so we each in our own way knew we had to move on it. We were being moved on it. It wasn't even, I like to refer to that as a no choice choice. It's like past a certain point, there is no alternative but to move. Right? There's so much force behind this thing. It is moving you. And so, of course, we met. And of course, that exploded open into the supernova of everything that we have experienced since. And of course, that now produces a legacy that never would have been allowed to exist had we not met those moments completely.
Right.
In spite of the naysayers, in spite of anything.
Yeah.
Naysayers, I mean, I'm talking about external forces, but what about all the internal forces? What about all the personal fears and personal insecurities? What about the fact that I don't even think, we're in the same league? Like, to me, Laura's a 10 and I'm not, so I'm like working the odds on this in my head, trying to figure out how I might be good enough for the very person who's probably wondering the same on her end. And so we've got all of these internal and external apparent barriers that we get to meet and transcend. The way we do that is described by the 21st angel. Valor.
Which we like to describe as courage plus love.
Yes.
Yeah.
We totally stole that
Yeah, but
it's not theft, I promise. It's what do they say?
Flattery.
Yeah. It's not mimicry, but basically
Mm-hmm.
it's the most sincere form of flattery. This comes from Richard Wright. At least that's the first time I ever heard it. His connection of courage and love, essentially equating to this theme of valor. We've really taken ownership of that. We recognize that to be true. So in our minds, when we see the word valor, it's courage plus love. There's a mathematical quality to that.
Mm-hmm.
But courage and love absolutely go together.
Right.
Love what you love to permit your excitement. Your way unfolds when you do. It does take courage to love what you love in a personal world that is overcome with opinions and ideas all telling you that you're not allowed to, or that it's not appropriate to.
Mm-hmm. That's why this pathway of the guardian is, you can see how it's not necessarily about protecting the kingdom or protecting anything outside of you. It's actually guarding yourself, mm-hmm. like holding your center intact and choosing yourself over and over again.
Yeah, you said it, if I'm remembering correctly earlier, you said something like command your own center.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's the embodiment of command.
The embodiment is command. So absolutely.
I like that a lot. And it seems totally appropriate. You come into command of your own center, which basically means, and literally means, you permit the sovereign expression of what's most true for you, period. The fact of the matter is, you're not even doing it in spite of anything. You're not doing it in spite of the voices. We're not called to defend ourselves against the world. And this is, obviously, this lesson is hitting very close to home for us because we have had to live this. And we have had to kind of operate under the initial assumption that, oh my goodness, we're under attack for no reason. We're under attack for the one most beautiful thing that anyone could experience or commit themselves to in a life. And it didn't make any sense, and it didn't make any sense until we finally got the hint, until what life was trying to show us finally got through our thick skulls, that it's not about going to war with life. It's not about defending against meanness, unkindness, or differing opinions. It's about choosing to love what you love. It's totally internal, and it's not against anything. It's for one thing, whatever that one thing may be for you. We have this little cutie sign down in our kitchen, and it's held the same message. It's one of these where you can assemble the letters. A letterboard, yeah. You can make it say anything you want it to say, and as long as, I'd say since February maybe, we've had the same message on it all day, every day, and it says, I choose you every day. That's on purpose. Mm-hmm. That's a choice. That's a choice that we make on purpose every day. That's exactly what we're talking about here as well. What do you love, and how willing are you to permit that, to permit yourself to love that, and to move in all of the most authentic and inspired ways that emerge as a result of loving that? Yeah. That's the question. And it's the main question that this prince needs to ask. The guardianship is interesting. I told you that when I woke this morning, this was one particular element of the contributors to this day's signature that I felt like I was scratching my head over. But now, very much thanks to what you've helped me see, I feel like, I get it. I really get it now. Mm-hmm. When we realize that the guardian is not defending against anything, but rather choosing to orient wholeheartedly towards something that is alive and real for itself, we realize that we're dealing not with a shield in the guardian, but a filter. Mm-hmm. And we talked a bit about this, and I think it's worth sharing. You can imagine, perhaps playfully imagine, two types of filters. We love the Berkey filter for our water. I've loved it for years. It's the only one that I will stand by. It's the best filter for water, as far as I'm concerned.
Team Berkey.
Team Berkey, yeah, I like that. So, don't shift too far away. We got to keep you on screen.
Oh.
The idea of a filter, you can imagine two different filters. One filter, if we were to personify it, might be very focused on what it is filtering out. And it has this laundry list of items that are not allowed in, right? And that filter, which is defending against all of those things, may, along the way, permit some water to get through. but it's kind of lucky if it does, because it's so busy about the work of saying, no, 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 you can't get through and you're not allowed. And it's against all of these things. Many of you viewing this, if you're anything like me, if you've lived a story in any way similar to mine, you know exactly what that feels like. You know exactly what it feels like to create boundaries, right? And to have to communicate your limitations and your expectations and all of these sort of things. We know what it's like to be that kind of a filter, but that's not what life calls for, and it's not what's being called for by this day signature. The other type of filter could care less about all of that stuff, truly. This particular type of filter is focused only on letting clean, clear water through. It has one orientation. I receive the cleanest water. Mm-hmm. And so inherently, in the action, it's not going to accept anything which is not equal to clean water. And so all of the same particulate matter remains on the right side of that filter, mm-hmm. except this one is wide open to receiving more and more and more of the good stuff, of the water. That's what this prince is doing, and it takes conscious effort. This is a filter that the entire set of virtues that we met in the swords were cultivated in order to permit.
Yeah.
That's why I imagine this guardian as like holding the sword of light. You know, he's like standing like a sentinel holding this sword. But we see the Prince of Wands as being very active. So this sword is like a part of him. It's not in some special display case in his bedroom. Mm-hmm. It's always in hand, because this prince, this signature, it knows that it has work to do. But that work is not defending against life. That work is openly receiving all aspects of life which do in fact align with the very highest, the very best, the most clear truth. That's what it's about. That's a completely different kind of take mm-hmm. on the idea of a guardian than anything I've ever even conceptualized before this morning. Mm-hmm. But that's exactly what we meet here.
Yeah.
It's a very commanding presence. Mm-hmm. And it's an impervious presence, an impenetrable presence, because nothing else exists. This is one way, one direction. Mm-hmm. It seems at some times harsh or penetrating, but it's not. Mm-hmm. It's focused, it's intentional, and that is the very model that this prince sets for the kingdom. Mm-hmm. Powerful model. Everyone wants to be led by someone that clear.
Right.
And it's also the model that we intend to set, not even for you, the viewers, but for one another, for ourselves, for the world that we are cultivating here. This is exactly the work that we are choosing to do too. And in any case where we find ourselves becoming wrapped up in the work of defense, self-defense, self-protection, we recognize what's happening and we reclaim our energy. Mm-hmm. An example of this, of course, has to do with these videos. A really easy example of this has to do with these videos. So between the two of us, I'm the one kind of responsible for managing our YouTube, which is brand new. But already in just the past week or 10 days, however long it's been that we've been producing this content in this format, we've begun to receive some uncomfortable or unkind messages, mm-hmm. you know, especially on YouTube. We all know the trolls are out there.
Right.
We get to decide what to do about that. What we have chosen to do is simply to ignore it. And in particular, what I've chosen to do as the one managing YouTube is to simply remove those notifications altogether from my view and not even tell Laura about them necessarily. That's a part of what it means for me to be the guardian in this regard. Now, not only am I doing that work for myself, but it extends beyond me to protect Laura. Why? Because we know exactly what we're doing, because we know exactly what direction we're headed. And it's very easy for us to be able to look at something at this point and say, oh, that's not clear water. And so it doesn't get in. Mm-hmm. That's all. There's nothing wrong with it. Right. It's just not a part of the story that we're telling. And so it doesn't exist. It just does not exist. And there's a reason that these different platforms have the ability to simply hide a notification. Mm-hmm. As far as you're concerned, it doesn't exist. We get to ignore those things that are not water because we're too busy drinking the good stuff. Mm-hmm. That's one example, right. really, of mm-hmm. what this pathway could look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's reminding me of the frequency of the day, which is 43. But anytime we put a 0 in at the end of that number, it becomes amplified. So the amplified frequency for today is 430.
Yeah, I'll read it.
And so, there is an entry in our frequency tables of a message attached to this number. Let me just bring it up here.
There it is.
Okay, so the frequency 430 says, every tendency and preference directs me and defines me. They equip me to remember myself well. So that's what this relentless orientation is about.
Yes. We're allowing those preferences, those loves, those tendencies to do what they were meant to do. They were meant to direct us and to define us. And what we find along the way is that we are in fact remembering ourselves as a result of that permission. And the more we remember, the larger we become.
We keep breaking through to new octaves.
Yes.
And that's a perfect lead into the 43rd angel
of
Epiphany, because that's what it feels like. You have these insights that land, and you keep having these moments of breakthrough where you just are more of yourself. That's
the best way to possibly say it. That's what breakthrough is all about. You're not breaking through from something bad to something better. You're breaking open into more and more and more of yourself. Into the the larger embodiment of, the more confident expression of yourself. That whole self, of course, is always available. But as we whittle away at everything which is not equal to this, more of it is permitted to come through. That's a very, very exciting movement, and it's really fun to find the 43rd angel here. I mean, Epiphany is really close to home for us too.
Yeah.
From day one, like as quickly as we could come, literally on day one, we went for our first Epiphany walk.
Yes, that's what we call them, these Epiphany walks, because when we go for a walk, the whole time we're talking and having these insights come in, and it's a super fruitful, experience.
Fluid, explosive, amazing experience.
So we've termed them Epiphany walks because of what they produce, and they're just so alive and part of, our daily life.
And that was, of course, before we knew that Epiphany was in any way connected to this 43, before we shared this frequency on the legacy level. Right out the gate, we recognized that there was something special happening there. And of course, Epiphany Walks has become a flow of life for us.
Yeah.
What happens on those walks now also happens while we're preparing food. So we have what we call Epiphany prep. We're preparing food, and then bam, all of these lights are going off.
Yeah, chopping veggies, simultaneously we're talking, and just...
we're living a life.
Yeah, it's a beautiful flow.
And that life is emerging as a flow of insight. That's what the pathway of insight is. And that's how integrated it becomes. We love to term these things because they feel magical and we recognize them to be. But ultimately, everything we're describing, anytime we meet an angel or meet one of these positions in the Liberated Tarot, anything we're describing is in fact the most natural thing in the world. And what we're learning to do is to release that which is unnatural, so that the natural expression of our life has space and opportunity to move and to breathe and to express itself in this way. So that's the pathway of insight. And of course, we arrive at the embodiment of breakthrough. I really love that we find the word breakthrough on this level of the embodiment. That once you've broken through to something, this isn't just about aha mental moments. This is about a holistic alteration of not only perspective, but sense of self.
Yeah. You can really see the Prince of Wands here, because one of his keynotes is growth. So absolutely, it's a transformation on a cellular level.
Well, I mean, the Prince breaks through to the King.
Yeah.
And what you realize, of course, is that we are never just one of these things. We are all of these things. And we are never completing a process because we're not attempting to improve or to develop. We are continuing a process of growth, which is it's eternal. And so the Prince becomes the King on this particular subject. and our perspective with regard to something within ourselves is altered for all time. We break through to this moment of transformation. We are changed. There is no going back. And then the prince over here on the subject of money is invited to break through to the king. And then over here on the subject of relationships, and then over here on the subject of career, and then over here on the subject of personal purpose. And on it goes as we are constantly ignited to expand. And there's that theme of ignition. We have only really very briefly touched on, but this is one of those words that when we discovered it for this position in the tarot, I knew absolutely that it was correct, because I could not help but look at the life that we were living and imagine anything short of that word ignition. I could clearly see how who we are choosing to be would function very much like a spark plug in life. Not even on purpose, just as a natural extension of who and how we are. We show up to the grocery store wearing our matching Lucky shirts, and people notice, and a smile. It ignites a smile, or it ignites a kind or curious, gesture, statement, or engagement of some sort.
Right.
That's one silly little example, but we realize these videos would be a much larger example. We recognize that in sharing the things that we're sharing, there will be many who are inspired to permit their own enjoyment in new ways.
Yeah.
Not because Laura and Timothy said so, but because for the first time they can see maybe other normal people, like someone just like themselves,
right,
doing that work of self-permission, allowing what is most natural, most authentic, closest to home, most familiar, most delicious, to have a central place in the experience. Oh, well, if they can do it, I think I could probably do it. Like, they're nice and all, but they're not that special. They're not very different from me. We talked about this on the walk, but when you look at characters in the mainstream, big characters like a Tony Robbins or Esther Hicks or something like this, it may be difficult to connect yourself to the model that they are currently setting, because maybe you weren't involved all along the way in that process of growth that has already unfolded for them.
Right.
But for those of you viewing our example right now, you're seeing us in a way at the beginning of that same growth pattern. And so it might feel a little more accessible, like, wow, they really are not that different from me. They're not on a stage talking to tens of thousands of people yet. So I can connect to that.
Right. I mean, I think it's clear that, and we've said this, that it took a lot for us to get on camera. But you can clearly see that we're new at this. We're definitely
learning alongside,
driven by something deeper inside of us that really wants to permit, our authentic expression.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're showing up, not, bursting on the scene as these like great speakers. I mean, Timothy, you are definitely a wonderful speaker, extremely eloquent, articulate. But me, I'm just like, I'm just going to show up and do my best. And I think what that actually demonstrates to others is that it doesn't matter. Just do the thing,
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is that this isn't a performance.
Right.
It's not polished in the way that some of these other expressions either have become or are being made out to be.
Yeah.
What you get to see here is real. It's as real as you are. And that means that it's going to continue to evolve and refine and become more eloquent and interesting. And that process that you are witnessing is a real life process that we're living. So we're just as surprised as anyone along the way. And that's awesome. We hope that it feels like a permission slip. It ought to. It should feel like an invitation to join us, to do your version of the same. And all of this, I think, brings us to the perfect concluding point about the prime instinct.
Yes.
Because to me, we've explained a lot about what we're seeing. There is a potential for a certain heaviness to build up around these ideas of self-responsibility and kind of owning up to the magnificence of our role. As beautiful as that is, it can start to make your head spin a little bit, right? And so we were curious to know what the prime instinct of this day would be. Now, we don't know if this is the sort of thing that's going to play out in every single day signature or not. We do know that we've witnessed this before, and we've mentioned this before, that some of these signatures do in fact seem to correspond to one of the 22 primes at the beginning of the Liberated Tarot.
Right. So the 21st angel,
which of course is connected to the 43 that we're working with today.
Mm-hmm. The 21st prime is the world, and the prime instinct is to play.
To play. So that 21st angel we're working with today first reveals itself back there in the frequency of 21 in the Liberated Tarot, member of the world. Very powerful presence story built into that one, very personal story built into that one for us as well. But the prime instinct of that particular presence, which again is alive within every one of us. This is something available, something natural within and to every single one of us. That prime instinct is to play. It's not even in this case to expand. It's not even in this case to grow. It's to play. And so somehow woven into everything we've mentioned today, everything we feel so excited by and inspired by, everything that feels so large, because it is, the tone of it is not serious. It's playful. It's inviting. It's calling for, and it's celebrating that part of you which is most delicious, most delightful. And here we find the connection between the princess and the prince. We mentioned with the queen and the king that the feminine masculine pairings that we meet along the way always work together. Well, now you have the elegance and the intention built into the prince kind of married to or weaving in with the delight and the ease and the playfulness of the princess. They are meant to work together. They temper one another, and what they afford is the possibility of a beautiful life. Yes, an elegant and intentional and focused and powerful and impactful life, but also a soft and gentle and expansive and spacious and surprising and delightful life. So what would it mean for you not only to permit yourself to love what you love, but simply permit yourself to play in that direction? It doesn't need to be some heavy effort. It gets to be an enjoyable one. And in fact, until it is truly a permission of sheer enjoyment, that full force of life, which is your birthright, is your inheritance, has not yet been allowed to flow in the way that it intends to. So that's what this day is inviting on the one hand and celebrating on the other. You have been born into the kingdom. It is all yours. The support, the security, the significance, the impact, all of this is built in. And you are invited to somehow, paradoxically, somehow, miraculously, live up into all of that through the pathway of guarding what you love most, permitting what you love most, and enjoying your life as completely as you possibly can. Understanding that that's the very thing that ignites or permits your destiny to unfold.
Yep.
What a summary.
Yeah.
What a day.
I'll say. That was great.
Thank you. Is there anything you would add?
No.
You think we've managed somehow to cover all the bases?
Yes.
In under an hour? It's great. Amazing. I mean, by the time we meet again tomorrow, we'll have discovered so much more, and we'll come back to it again. But for now, this feels a bit like drinking from the fire hose. It's been a lot, and it's a lot for us, and I'm sure it's a lot for you. But man, we hope it tastes as good for you as it does for us. And we're excited about tomorrow. Tomorrow's another big day, but big in a different way than we've met yet. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, literally have fun.
Yeah.
Understanding that that's your princely role.
Yes. Perfect.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for being here with us. We'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.
Bye.